Greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well today. Wow, we've been jumping down a rabbit hole for a couple of days with these missing 411 cryptid connections. I don't know about you guys, but it's pretty chilling. Anyway, today I have got another fantastic set of encounters to share with you. Before we get into that, though, a couple links I'd like to share as well. As you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, and my merch store to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Those links are in the description below. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters Volume 1, 2, and 3, the audiobook version. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeffrey Nadolny. They're available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes. The links to those audiobooks are also in the description as well. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's get on with today's upload. Shall we? Today's first encounter. I may seem out of my mind, and God, I feel like it. The first night I heard it was the end of summer 2019. I was building my own art studio in the back of this old building. One night I stepped out onto the deck to clean up. I was staring off into the woods that ran right up next to the stairs leading up to my studio. I heard something let loose this intense, deep howling off into the distance. It had such a blood-curdling effect on the air around me, it gave me goosebumps and raised every hair on my body. And shortly after, it went silent. I heard all of the dogs in a 1 to 2 mile radius barking, yipping, howling in the direction that roar/howl. There was no way it was a wolf or any large cat. I've heard videos and sound bites of wild cats, mountain lions making those demonic type sounds, and that was not it. This was a roar of a human/animal mix. I could hear it in its voice. The area of Ohio I'm in isn't a place where you'd see any large cats, or let alone hear one. My first thought was a Wendigo was coming to get me. And I don't know why that popped into my head like that. And countless other number of things have been happening more and more. Almost like intuition or something in my head. 4 weeks prior to the weirdest shit I've ever experienced, I was approached by a man about commissioning 3 art pieces of something I was not familiar with at all. Wendigos. More specifically, a wartime Wendigo where it's this huge 1,000-foot tall creature, taller than a building/skyscraper, and it's made out of all of us, body parts sticking out everywhere. A face here and there. It was supposed to represent all of our greed and desire, or want for more. Sadly, I didn't have the time to do the work on these pieces, so I passed. But it started reminding me of my own monster that's been following me my whole life. I made some drawings of dream/night terror I had a week before this man approached me to turn us into a Wendigo. In my dream, it was a tall, emaciated creature with an animal-like body, features legs, human-like arms, crouched in my kitchen like a dog, and would sit looking in my cabinets. "What the hell are you doing, dude?" I asked. "Chill the fuck out. I'm looking for some chips or something. I'm starving," it replied. I sat up quickly and threw the blanket off me because I didn't say that out loud. It turned and looked at me, and the way it looked was indescribable. But I took in every detail I could. It had large black holes where the eyes were supposed to be, and just a jagged slit across the lower side of its face that represented a mouth with no lips, and thousands of rows of jagged teeth curled around its gum, with a long tongue sliding out between them. It let out a gurgling, squelching scream. Then all of a sudden, black smoky tendrils shot out where its hair was supposed to be on its head, lingered for a second, and sucked back in towards its body. Then boom, it vanished. I made drawings of it as soon as I woke up and tried to put the pieces together as to why it was in my kitchen. And every hair on my body stood on end because I still had an unanswered email about commissioning some artwork based on it. Turned and looked at me. The way it looked was indescribable. But I took in every detail I could. It had large black holes where the eyes were supposed to be, and just a jagged slit across its lower side of its face that represented a mouth with no lips. Thousands of rows of jagged teeth curled around its gums, with a long tongue sliding out between them. It let out this gurgling, squelching scream, then all of a sudden, black smoky tendrils shot out to where its hair was supposed to be on its head, lingered for a second, then sucked back in towards its body. Then boom, it vanished. I made drawings of it as soon as I woke up and tried to put the pieces together as to why it was in my kitchen, and every hair on my body stood on end because I still had an unanswered email about commissioning some artwork based on it. Fast forward to June 2020, Corona has now taken over the world, and I'm sure I've lost my mind. I forgot all about it, and I'm hanging out with a friend at 3 a.m., hanging out with a friend after months of not seeing or talking to anyone, it seemed. We went out to White Castle for a quick bite. She walks out first and hits the bottom step. As I'm walking out and locking the door, I hear something breaking tree limbs, crashing through them. Not fast, but not slow, and definitely noticeable. And it was coming from high, and gradually getting louder as it neared us as it got lower. It reminded me of an orangutan or a gorilla, the way it swung from branch to branch. I could hear its hands gripping each one and snapping smaller limbs on its way. It was coming in our direction. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I'm crazy, until she turned around quickly and was looking up high into the trees. She asked me, "Did you hear that?" I turned white and had felt the air get heavier from the fear that was emanating from this thing. As I came down the stairs, she's staring into the trees, looking upward. I glanced and saw branches moving. I yelled at her to get out of here quickly, pulling her towards the direction of the car. We turned our backs to the woods when this loud thwack landed just behind me, and all the hairs on my body stood straight up. I felt like it had a log or a large, thick branch in its hand and smacked the ground with it. I stood paralyzed with fear. The air was thicker and different when whatever it landed directly behind me. I could feel the air of the force of it, and it brought tears to my eyes. It was the weirdest feeling to have come over me, and feel like it's crushing every inch of my body without touching me. And to hurt so bad it brought tears to my eyes and made me shake uncontrollably. And the fear it made me feel was too much to bear. Hands down, one of the scariest moments I've ever encountered. I couldn't shake it. So we went to White Castle, and we were both shaken to our core, disbelieving of what we had just witnessed. We come back and turn the lights on in her car and let them light up the woods for a good 20 minutes before we felt safe to go back outside. The only weapon I had in sight was a golf club. She told me she saw it high in the trees, and it looked almost like an owl-like creature with weird features. But later on she told me a story. When she was a teenager, she thought she was going to get taken off the back of a motorcycle by a huge owl swooping down towards her. And I told a friend about this a few months later and somehow remembered whatever these things are. They fed off our fear. I don't know where I remember this from or why these thoughts randomly popped into my head. It's almost like something else is telling me. Since then, there has been a whole lot more weird shit happening. I've put a lot of pieces together in this story so far, and a few weeks later something else happened at a friend's house one night while we were playing music. It's something that has made me vow never to step foot into the woods anywhere ever again. Really quick, I think the whole touching on the Wendigo thing and him interpreting was the man explaining, hey, this is what they are. I want you to paint them for me, yada yada. The experience that made him not want to step out into the woods ever again was about a month after the last encounter. There was a shredded rabbit placed on the bottom step of his studio. Now, when I mean shredded, I'm not going to post the picture, but you see the head and front legs, and then just skeletal remains till you get maybe to the back haunches of this thing. And it's just a horrendous sight. And yeah, I can't blame the guy for not wanting to go out into the woods. It's pretty crazy. Today's second part of the upload. I've experienced something truly phenomenal this week that I cannot explain. Something so earth-shattering and reality-breaking that I'm still in shock. Adrenaline is still pumping through my system now, even as I write this 4 days later. Last Monday I was camping alone in the Uaware National Forest. My goal was to distress and simply enjoy nature. I brought along a knife, some MREs, which are packs of freeze-dried food essentially, a tarp, a rope to construct a shelter. I arrive at the campground at around 2 and begin my hike. It's deathly quiet. The only wildlife I encounter are 2 deer at the beginning of the trail. They squeal and run away. As I'm hiking, I notice a large amount of quartz deposits strewn about, enough to raise an eyebrow. I reach a valley clearing about a mile in, and in between them 2 streams, I constructed my shelter in the center. Old campfires littered about and told me this place was a good place to camp. After finishing my tarp tent, I began to walk around exploring the area. I heard thunder and decided to head back to my shelter. Here's where things start to get strange. I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it still. I lie on my stomach in my tent as the storm rolls in. I feel a strange pressure change. Low bass frequency and temperature drop. Not that odd considering I'm in a valley. As it approaches, however, I feel a sensation that I've never felt before. I can feel the storm above me in a way I can't fully describe. The best I can do to detail was feeling that my consciousness was aware and expanding enough to feel this mass above me. I'm thinking this is very weird, but don't entertain any thoughts of this possibility being paranormal. That is until I hear the first sound. I hear a loud whoop. I'd guess a quarter of a mile away. The hairs stand up all over, and then it begins to pour rain very hard. At this point, I have no earthly idea what could have made that sound, other than a very large animal that I am unfamiliar with. Time passes. I'm still lying in my makeshift tent. Not quite dark, but it's raining, so I have nothing to do but scan the trees and listen. That's when I see a light, a very small light, what looked like a coin reflecting in the sun, only there is no sun and it's moving. It blinked on and off quickly, then reappeared a few feet to the side, then off again. I never saw it again. Not soon after, I began to hear what in my mind were bipedal footsteps. They didn't seem like they came from a large animal, but I never saw what made them. They began in an exact spot I witnessed the light a few moments prior. I'm staring intently at this spot, frozen in fear, clutching my knife. I'm unable to move. It's silent until dusk. It's still raining. And then I hear a second whoop, much closer and louder, on the other side of my shelter. Whatever made this noise was maybe 50 feet away. Night falls and adrenaline's pumping through me. I lie on my back. It was so dark. It didn't matter if my eyes were open or closed. There was no noise for a few hours, and I began to relax slightly. That is, until I heard babbling. I had set up in between two streams, so my rational brain was making me think that it was just the water. It was not. If I had allowed myself to believe that I was actually hearing some sort of inhuman speech that far into the woods all alone, I would have panicked, or blacked out with fear perhaps. I hear this intermediately throughout the night, in two places. It's soft, as if they were whispering to each other about me, not wanting to wake me up. I lose consciousness at some point, but awake to something being thrown at my tent, a small rock. Nothing more of note happens that I'm aware of until morning, where I get the hell out of there. I arrive home and immediately begin researching what could have possibly been making those noises. I look at deer, mountain lion, bear, even raccoons and squirrel noises. Nothing comes close. That is, until I decide to entertain the Sasquatch theory. I came across the Sierra sounds. It's exactly the same. I can't tell you how frightening it was when I heard this video. It is the exact same noise. I can't even begin to process this. Even still, I'm shaking typing this out for you. The murmuring, that's the worst part. They were talking to each other. Please let me know what your thoughts are, or if you know anybody who has had similar experiences. Let me assure you, everything I have written is the truth, and I feel completely healthy. I know what I heard. Extra note, I am not releasing the exact location without actually going back myself, which I am not opposed to doing. After doing more research, I've concluded these beings are not to be underestimated or disturbed, so the last thing I want is a bunch of people poking about the spot. It may have even been a mistake to even say what forest, but it's too late. If you are a legitimate researcher who understands this, please be careful when you go out there. Today's third part of the upload. Back in the early 90s when I was a kid, around 13 at the time of this incident, and I used to stay at my grandparents' house a lot in a very rural area of southeast Arkansas. When I say rural, I mean it was a series of networked dirt roads to get to their house. The closest neighbors besides my aunt and uncle, who lived a quarter of a mile up the road, were over a mile and a half away. This was very backwoods and isolated from most civilizations. The closest town was a 10-mile trip. It's in the middle of farmland and mostly woods. They've lived in this house since my mother was a child, and had both grown up just a ways down the road. Anyway, there was a general store roughly 3 to 4 miles down the network of dirt roads. This was your typical country general store, run by an old lady and her husband, and its only customers really only consisted of people who lived out there. One day my grandmother asked me if I wanted to walk to the general store to get some milk, eggs, and a few miscellaneous things that she needed. I told her I would. She gave me some money, and I headed on my way. It was fairly early in the day, and I had plenty of time to get back before dark, which I always made sure to do when I was out roaming around. Things can get mighty creepy out in the backwoods of Arkansas after nightfall. It's a darkness unlike most people who have lived primarily in cities or towns have ever experienced. Me being 13, had poor time management skills. I stopped at the bottom of a hill next to this small wooden bridge you have to cross, and messed around at the creek catching crawdads and such, and kind of just messed around the whole day and on the way to the store. By the time I left the store, I realized it was quickly approaching dark. This was fall and darkness set upon the land pretty early in the day. I didn't want to be walking those lonely, secluded roads through the woods alone and dark, so I hurried as fast as I could, running and sprinting as much as possible, but it was not enough. By the time I had made it back to the bottom of the hill near the bridge, it was almost completely dark, and there was an eerie sort of glow brought about by a very bright, nearly full moon that was rising. At the top of the hill, the road was perfectly straight and flat, with woods on the left side and a large field on the right. About a mile up from the top of the hill is my grandparents' house, and you can see it from there. As I top the hill, I can see a faint glow of lights from their house. I feel a sense of relief because I was kind of freaked out a bit. But knowing I was close and could see the house offered a bit of comfort. The field on the right was somewhat illuminated by the glow of the moon, and my eyes had adjusted to the darkness rather well at this point. As I walked up the road, I hear something from the left behind me on the wooded side of the road. It sounded like leaves being rustled. I turned to look and see nothing at first, but then, as my eyes began to focus, I see something in the ditch. A black, shadowy shape slowly moving towards me. At first I thought it was a dog, but then I realized it was much too large to be a dog. And then I realized it wasn't actually walking on four legs. It was crawling like a person would do. I stared for a moment out of sheer confusion, trying to figure out what I was seeing. And then a jolt of fear shot through me as it dawned on me that whatever this thing was, it had been trying to sneak up on me. At that exact moment, this thing stood upright out of the ditch on two legs like a person. It had the shape of a human, long arms, legs, and was proportioned as such. It stood roughly 7 to 8 feet in height and was completely covered in black, maybe dark brown fur. Its face was dark in color. I really can't seem to recall too much in the way of features. It was not a bear, I'm for certain of that, or any other kind of animal I had seen for that matter. I immediately dropped the bag of stuff that I had been carrying and bolted as fast as my legs could take me toward my grandparents' house. I heard a heavy breathing, guttural growling kind of sound behind me, and heard this thing's footsteps running behind me on the gravel as it gave chase. I did not turn around and was certain that it would grab me at any moment. I then heard it crash off into the woods and let out this earth-shattering, ungodly scream unlike anything I had ever heard before or since. I'm positive this thing could have easily caught me had it wanted to, but for some reason it let me go. By the time I reached my grandparents, my heart felt as if it would explode from the combination of adrenaline rush I had from being scared beyond any type of fear I had felt before or since, and full-on sprinting as hard and as fast as possible for about a half a mile straight. I flew into the house, and an incoherent mess of hyperactive gibberish tried to explain to my grandparents what had just happened. My grandmother really didn't seem to believe me, but believed something had scared me and acted rather weird about the whole thing. She tried to convince me that it was just a dog or some other type of animal. The next morning I woke up and found my grandpa sitting outside whittling wood underneath a shade tree in the front yard, as he often liked to do. I went out and sat down beside him in one of the old metal lawn chairs. He was a very rational man, down to earth, and had grown up and hunted this area his entire life. He knew every square inch of it. It was mapped into his mind. He knew every type of critter and creature that lived in those woods, what noise they made, where to find them, and how to catch them. I had only been hunting with him for a couple of years, but had been going out into these woods with him since a pretty young age on walks and such. He had passed a lot of his knowledge down to me during those adventures. I spoke to him about what had happened to me the night before, and told him that I knew what I had saw. It wasn't my overactive imagination. I was not making it up, and it definitely wasn't a dog. He knew that I wasn't just some dumb 13-year-old kid, and he knew that I knew the things he had taught me. He stopped whittling, looked me right into my eyes, and said, "I know what you saw. I've seen them before. There are things out in those woods that people don't understand, and that a person ought not go fooling with. I remember those words clearly to that day because it gave me affirmation, but at the same time made me realize that whatever I had seen was very real in existence and beyond my understanding. My grandfather then went to tell me that far back into the woods there are some cliffs. At the bottom of those cliffs is a cave. He told me that the cave is where the creature lives. He had once stumbled upon it a long time ago when he was hunting. He said he was standing on the top of a cliff looking at it when the creature fitting the same description emerged and began screaming wildly at him. He said that he took a shot at it, missed, and then this thing gave chase to him, but my grandpa was on top of the cliff, so in order to get him, this thing had to go around a pretty good distance and then up, which he said it quickly began to do, so he hightailed it out of there in a hurry. He said the whole way back home he felt as if he was being watched and kept hearing twigs snap behind him. He was certain this thing was following him, stalking him. He made it home. As he reached his front porch, he turned and looked back into the woods from where he had just come and saw it peeking out from behind a tree. Later that night, he said that he and my grandmother awoke in the early morning hours to large rocks being thrown at the house and ungodly howling noises from outside, and this thing trying to get into the house. He said he could hear it walking around on the front porch, rattling doorknobs, banging on the windows, and sounding like it was muttering to itself in a low, deep, garbled voice. But it didn't sound like a language, just a bunch of gibberish. After a while, the thing went back to throwing rocks and howling, so my grandfather grabbed his shotgun and fired it out the front door a few times into the darkness in the direction of the howling, and said that he heard it run back into the woods. He didn't know if he hit it or not. He said that it was the last he'd ever seen of it or heard of it. But over the years, an occasional farmer's cow would be mutilated, or someone's hunting dog would go unexplainably missing, or someone would have a story about some strange creature they'd seen. He also said it scared my grandmother beyond words, and she absolutely has refused to talk about it or even acknowledge that it happened, which explains her acting weird about it when I told her what happened to me. I know this sounds pretty far-fetched, and you can believe it or not. It makes no difference to me. I know what I saw and what my grandpa knew I saw, and neither of us had ever felt the need to convince anyone else of it. In fact, until today, I've never actually spoken of it to anyone other than my grandpa, and he passed away roughly 10 years ago. Today's final encounter. This happened to me in Pleasant Prairie back in 1983 when I was 15 years old. I was familiar with the area from hunting there. I had to talk to our parents into letting us camp out there, where there were some in-laws of my brother who lived close by, so if anything happened, we could go there. My father dropped us off, and we fished the pond that evening and fell asleep that night. Nothing unusual happened. The next morning we got up and were fishing again, and I started to walk around the pond. There, standing by the water, was the strangest looking thing I'd ever seen. It was about 6 feet long, with dark brown fur. It had dog-like characteristics, but was not a dog. It was very large. I stood maybe 10 feet away from it. It was staring at me, and I was staring at it. In one quick move, it went off through the woods, moving so quickly and graceful. It was amazing. My friend never saw it. I was in shock at what I had just seen. Needless to say, I left right away. I told my dad what I had seen, and he looked at me like I was nuts. After that look, I didn't speak of it again. I went home and looked at every animal book, but it resembled nothing in those books. I basically shut up about it due to people thinking that I was nuts or had mistaken it for something else. I can honestly say it was so strange to see this thing, whatever it was, and getting so close to it. It looked as though it could have done me in quickly if it wanted to. I'm an avid hunter and fisherman, but what I saw that day will stick in my mind forever. Wow, that third encounter really spun me for a loop. I don't know about you. Being so deep. I mean, you're not even really deep in the woods, you're just deep in the country. Forests, fields, hills, not a house around. Pitch black. Something's chasing you. And then the next day, your grandfather says, "You're not nuts, bud." I've seen it too. You know, I really am starting to think that the connection to these 411s are the cryptids. I mean, yeah, there might be portals that they fall through and this and that, but if these cryptids use portals, wouldn't it make sense that they take them through the portal? I mean, just an idea. It's just creepy. And that not the last, but the second encounter where the poor guy, first encounter I believe, where he found the dead rabbit on the bottom of his stairs, and that picture is grotesque. I'm not gonna share it because it's just so, I mean, you don't see a Dogman, you don't see a Sasquatch, you don't see anything except this torn up rabbit on the bottom of his steps. Can you blame him for not wanting to go out in the woods anymore? Jeez, crow. You know, it's almost like these things have just like the sickest sense of humor, that they just love watching us be in fear. I don't know. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed today's upload as much as I enjoyed sharing these with you. I hope you guys are safe. Please, if you guys go out in the woods, be prepared. You know, just don't go half-assed. If you're gonna go and go hard. No one's gonna laugh at you because you got extra gear, extra this or that. Can never have too much, right? Alright guys, thanks for listening. With that, I'm gonna bid y'all farewell and see ya!